Great. Hello and welcome to United Against Nuclear Iran's roundtable on Will Hezbollah open a northern front against Israel? I'm Kasra Aarabi, Director for IRGC Research at United Against Nuclear Iran, UANI, and today we are joined by two truly distinguished experts on this topic. I'd like to begin by introducing David Daoud, Director of Israel, Lebanon and Syria research at UANI. As well as David, we will be joined by Zohar Palti, former Director of Policy and Political Military Bureau at the Israeli Ministry of Defense, former Director of Intelligence at the Israeli Mossad, and Advisory Board member of UANI. And before we start, I'd like to begin with some opening remarks. Almost 3 weeks have passed since the Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel, what many are calling Israel's 9/11 moment. Today, a full-scale conflict has broken out between Israel and Hamas, with Israel preparing for a ground operation into Gaza to neutralize the Hamas terror threat. Meanwhile, the Islamic Republic of Iran, via the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, is continuing to threaten escalation via a multi-front attack against Israel through its network of proxies. We have seen the Islamic Republic's foreign minister, Hossein Amir Abdullahian, an IRGC Quds Force affiliate, doing a round trip across the Middle East to meet with Hezbollah, Hamas, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad officials, both in Lebanon, Syria, and in Qatar, where senior Hamas leadership are residing. The US has been drawn into the conflict in the sense of declaring full support for Israel whilst pushing for de-escalation. And I think truly we should pay attention and not forget that more than 200 Israeli hostages, including children, are being held by Hamas as we speak in Gaza. I wanted to start with those opening remarks to set the stage to what should be a very informative discussion with some truly distinguished experts. In terms of format, I want to first go to David to give us an overview of Hezbollah's calculus. We are talking about Hezbollah opening a possible northern front against Israel. So David, I'd like to hand over to you first to give us Hezbollah's calculus, talk about the capabilities of Hezbollah, the levels of coordination with the other members of the so-called axis of resistance, but also I think a really important point I would like you to unpack is the impact this is all having on Lebanon's domestic constituency, on Hezbollah's constituency, but more broadly, the Lebanese population. I'm sure we will get to the ins and outs of that through a moderated discussion later, but I will hand over to you, David, to start our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasra. So I guess I'll keep it at the 50,000-foot view for now, and we'll delve deeper into these questions a little bit, because truly we could spend a whole webinar on each one of them. Let's start with Lebanon's or Hezbollah's domestic calculus, because I think that's where everything kind of stems from, and where we can kind of begin to gauge where Hezbollah could move and its constraints. As we know, Lebanon's undergoing a massive economic meltdown that's been going on for 4 years. The protests that arose out of that about 4 years ago were not directed against Hezbollah per se, right? They were even pro-Hezbollah protesters. This was a massive movement. Well, I wouldn't even call it a movement. It was an outpouring of grievance against decades of corruption. Now, this didn't weaken Hezbollah directly, but it does constrain the group, because now it has to consider the fact that economic aid, recovery aid, will not be coming to Lebanon, and post-bellum Lebanese ire that may not have been to this level in previous rounds with Israel, say after 2006, right? There will be no recovery aid. There'll be no $10,000 to rebuild an apartment this time. So that's kind of the framework that Hezbollah is operating in. At the same time, as you mentioned, coordination. right? Hamas within Gaza and outside of Gaza, as I've been highlighting in my work recently, has ceased to operate as an independent entity. Within Gaza, it operates as a first among equals of the Joint Operations Room of the Palestinian Resistance. So this also includes Palestinian Islamic Jihad. This includes the Popular Resistance Committees, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, kind of the alphabet soup of Palestinian militias. If we look at the videos closely that came out of the terror attack, the massive terror attack that struck Israel on October 7th, you'll see arm patches that have the logo of the Joint Joint Operations Room, in addition to fighters from respective militias wearing their respective headbands. So that's within the Gazan context, right? Hamas is the first among equals of an umbrella organization. Within the broader regional context, this Joint Operations Room, Hamas, now operate as part of the resistance axis, as you noted. This links them to Hezbollah in terms of cooperation and coordination. I mean, Nakhale and I think Saleh al-Aruri were meeting with Nasrallah just 2 days ago, updating him, I'm assuming, on what's going on the ground, probably just coordinating with Hezbollah moving forward. And, one thing that I've noted, or that I found very noticeable, Nasrallah is a very talkative guy, Secretary General of Hezbollah. He hasn't said anything in almost 20 days on perhaps one of the biggest regional conflagrations in decades. It sounds odd, or it seems odd. Meanwhile, we've had Iranian messaging on this, which suggests to me a degree of coordination that's coming from Iran, right? Even down to the level of messaging that this is being controlled by Tehran. We have had several media reports. I think one that just came out yesterday, or the day before, of Palestinian militants training for months in Iran for this, which makes sense considering some of the attacks, mortars, paragliding could not have gone unnoticed by Israeli surveillance. So there is coordination. There is probably some intelligence sharing. There's probably some advice. There's probably a division of labor that's going on between them, right? You guys handle this, we'll handle that, each based on their ability to kind of withstand Israeli military retaliation. This depends on, again, domestic circumstances, like we said with Hezbollah before. We can get into this in detail, but my sense is the plan itself, the way it unfolded on October 7th, originated as a Hezbollah plan that Nasrallah has been threatening to execute since 2011. So the coordination is tight. Hezbollah is acting as it has been, as I guess Iran's point for coordinating Palestinian militia activities, and that's where we are now. I think you asked also, will Hezbollah be getting into the what's the possibility of Hezbollah getting into this? I think it really depends. Opening up a second front really depends on, I think, a calculus that rests not ultimately with Hezbollah, because I think Hezbollah would prefer right now to avoid opening up a second front if the decision were left up to it entirely, considering the domestic constraints. This does not mean that Iran cannot override that, just as they did in Syria, mind you. I don't think Hezbollah was thrilled about having to go spend all of its political capital, the blood and treasure, to save Assad after he miscalculated, and what could have been resolved in relatively peaceful means he turned into a violent civil war. But they got an order from Iran and proceeded. That order could come depending on how Iran views the value of what I've come to call the southern front of the resistance axis, which is now the Gaza Strip.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. I just had a follow-up question before going off to Zohar for the Israeli assessment. In terms of success for this operation, and you said that you termed it a Hezbollah operation or Hezbollah-led operation. What does success look like for Hezbollah? And if you take a step back and look at the current status quo, do you believe that they view what is going on, both in terms of on the ground, as successful, as well as psychological operations, information war? Do you see that they are winning that, or do they view the fact that they are that they're winning that? What does success look like for Hezbollah and the axis of resistance more broadly?
Well, That's a question, and I guess I'll answer as a lawyer here. It depends. Depends. A lot depends on the Israeli response. A lot depends on where a ceasefire leaves the respective forces. Let's look at it from just the perspective of what happened on October 7th, and in a purely dispassionate manner. So let's go back in history a little bit. 2011, February 2011, Secretary General Hassan Nasrallahs starts threatening to invade the Galilee. And he makes it sound like this is going to be a conventional invasion. Now, if we assess Hezbollah's strength, that's not realistic. They are a guerrilla army with hybrid capabilities. We've seen that in Syria. At the same time, they don't have the capability to conquer and hold territory in a conventional sense, right? They don't have the numbers compared to the Israel Defense Forces. They don't have armor. They don't have standoff firepower. What they have, and if they were to attack as a conventional force without these things on Israeli territory, where Israel has this advantage in all of these areas, basically they would be exposing themselves to destruction, right? This would be, I say this again as pure analysis, right? This would be kind of Israel's wish in a certain way that Hezbollah would cease to operate as a guerrilla organization with its current capabilities and come out into the open. It would make Israel's job a lot easier. So Hezbollah is a lot of things. They're not suicidal. They're not self-destructive. So what would this look like, right? What would this plan have looked like? It would look like exactly what we saw out of the Gaza Strip, right? I think in an ideal world, again, ideal from the resistance axis's perspective, this would have happened on several fronts simultaneously. There are reasons why the resistance axis felt they had to do it now. I think it's mainly tied to Saudi-Israeli normalization. But again, what we saw was a massive incursion, right? Temporary seizure of kibbutzim, moshavim, right? Border towns, massive amounts of murder. I think if we look at the weaponry, the capabilities, they had intended on doing a lot more. Thankfully, they didn't succeed. And taking hostages, obviously. And I think perhaps most importantly, as Matti Friedman once dubbed it, the terror selfie, right? We see this, I saw this in one of the Golani bases that they had taken over. You can see if you're watching the video, a lot of the soldiers have been killed. And the Hamas fighters are still kind of pretending to break into rooms while being filmed, right? If anyone has watched any one of Hamas, Hezbollahs, the resistance axis's music videos, right? They specialize in these Hollywood-like scenes that demonstrate or purport to demonstrate strength, military prowess. Meanwhile, they are just, again, staged. So I think that's kind of what they were aiming for. To that end, they did succeed, right? They succeeded in being able to also claim that they surprised. They love to talk about this, right? Surprises that they have in store for the Israelis. They did succeed in surprising the Israeli military establishment. They did succeed in murdering a lot of Israelis, taking a lot hostage. So in that, they can claim success. Now, what is the next stage, right? I think that's where, does the success last or not? Now, the Israelis, let's hope they mean this, have said that Hamas is basically slated for elimination, right? Anything short of that, as we've seen in prior rounds, if Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the resistance axis militias generally are able to continue firing rockets till the last day of the war, they're able to, through some sense, force a premature ceasefire through the UN Security Council and allow to fight another day, they'll claim that as success as they have in the past. A lot of that will depend on, I think the resistance axis miscalculated on the Israeli public mood, but there's also the American public mood, which does constrain Israel. And how much can the American public mood bear to see the destruction that's being wrought onto Gaza? And again, putting aside all assessments of international law, legality, that doesn't matter in the court of public opinion, unfortunately, when you see the images of destruction that are necessary in part and parcel of war, but that do have an impact.
And I'd like to come to that in the moderated questions and the conversation, because I think it's a really, really important aspect. And we are seeing, certainly, I mean, I'm here in the UK, and a shift in public opinion, and that is all really, I mean, as someone who looks at the IRGC very closely, this is textbook IRGC doctrine. But before we go into that, we should go to Zohar. Zohar, an absolute pleasure to have you join. Thank you so much. Particularly given the current situation, I'm sure you're incredibly busy. Zohar, David gave us an assessment of the Hezbollah calculus, where we are in terms of where they stand in the ongoing confrontation. Perhaps you can give us an assessment of the situation right now on the ground, but also Israel's calculus, capabilities, and some scenario planning moving forward in relation to the possibility of Hezbollah opening a northern front. Zohar, over to you. Oh, I believe you're on mute, Zohar.
I'm good right now. You hear me? Great. So it's great to be with you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I will try to describe in a couple of minutes, because Hezbollah is not standing alone over here. And the horrible, vicious, whatever we'll call it, the terrorist attack that happened in the October 7, this is for us a milestone. It's the first time since the creation of Israel after the Holocaust that we have one day in a couple of hours that we're losing so many civilians just because of savages. And this is a milestone that is changing Israel, no doubt. Probably will change the Gaza Strip. It'll change the dynamic between us and the Palestinians. You're asking regarding Hezbollah right now because it's all connected. And we have to mention some other elements like the Iranians, of course, that they are the mastermind behind everything. And if you're speaking about Iran, you're speaking about Yemen and Houthis, you're speaking about the Shia militias in Iraq, you're speaking about Syria, Bashar al-Assad, Iranian IRGC, Syrian, meaning this is a big game over here. This is a big challenge for all of us. Let's start from the beginning. Our main effort right now, after September, October, is to take down Hamas, to change the reality in Gaza Strip, and this is the main effort. Hezbollah is not the main effort for the time being. Hezbollah is secondary. Because we understood exactly the conversation that you just had right now, we recruited hundreds of thousands of Israeli reserves that are deploying in the south, but in a very robust way also in the north to be prepared regarding Hezbollah. In a minute, I will come back to that. But what we face, and over here, some people, mainly in America and of course in Europe, have to realize that the circumstances that Israel is in, whether it's with Hamas in the south or whether it's Hezbollah, that we don't have a buffer. It's not a continent like the US, that you have the Atlantic and you have other oceans around. Sometimes we're speaking about over here, and that's what we saw with the Hamas, tragically, in the villages of the kibbutzim and moshavim, that you have sometimes 50 meters, that the fence, some of the kibbutzim is right beside the fence, that this is the international border between us and Gaza. In the north, it's the same. 10 yard, 15 yard, 20 yard, from the kibbutzim till the fence. So meaning the defense that we are doing over here during the last decade, we'll have to review it in our national strategy. And Hezbollah, as was mentioning before, is taking advantage for that. And Hezbollah is a well-equipped organization. But you asked me before what Hezbollah objective over here. The Iranian invested in the last 30 years billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in Hezbollah. I'm just asking right now, is the purpose was to help Hamas? Or it's deeper than that, regarding the national interest of the Iranians, like the nuclear program, the military nuclear program, or to, I don't know, to deal with Israeli if one day we will decide to do something, I don't know, in Lebanon or something like that. Meaning the dilemma over here of the leadership of Hezbollah is not simple one. And Nasrallah, as you know, have a couple of hats over here. One is the Lebanese one. He is part of the Lebanese political system. One is the jihadi one. You know, Hezbollah is two Arabic name. One Hizb is the party, and Allah, of course, is the jihad. No doubt he's the leader of a terror organization, guerrilla, military, whatever we will call it. And the third hat that he's having, he's the leader of Iran representative in Lebanon. So when he have to take a decision right now, whether to launch a war completely with us, he's got some issues that you have to consider. The other ones is the experience that he used to have with us from 2006. We all remember the speech that he gave a couple of days after the war ended. And he said, if I knew that the Israeli government will react like we reacted in 2006, meaning to take down the Dakhya, the southern part in Beirut, I'm not sure that I will approve of the Jihad Council that recommend me to do the kidnapping of the Israeli soldier in 2006. Now, to compare the capabilities that Hezbollah have, but also the IDF have right now, whether Air Force, Intel, targets, and other, to 2006, it's like apple and oranges. That will be a devastating war. And if we took down the Dakhya back then, we can flatten Beirut and other cities completely in Lebanon right now with the capabilities that we have. And again, as I said before, whether we like to do it right now, I'm not sure. But whether we have the ability to do it, the answer is definitely yes. And they know it. Now, in the last 3 weeks, he's challenged us all over the northern border. Till yesterday, he lost already 44 warriors of Hezbollah, terrorists of Hezbollah, whatever you call it. Meaning he's paying a price for that. Just for the sake to help his brothers, the Palestinians that used to massacre civilians. This is how Hezbollah is possessing itself, shoulder to shoulder, with unhuman people that used to came in Saturday morning, Shabbat, 6:30 in the morning, to slaughter children in their bed. This is Hezbollah? This is the Shia? This is the Iranian agenda? Probably yes, because right now they're shoulder to shoulder with them. And we are angry right now. And we are ready right now. And we are deployed right now. And by the way, Hezbollah know it. They already said it today. That the element of surprise is no longer there for them. So, and again, but I'm going back to the mastermind that is sitting in Tehran. And all the kids are playing under his directive. And it's not by coincidence that you saw a couple of days ago that one of the American US vessels that spread in near the Yemen coast just intercept a couple of cruise missiles, probably aiming to us, to the Jordanians, to American interest in Iraq. I don't know exactly, but no doubt to the good guys' interest. It's not by coincidence that we see that the IRGC is every 5 minutes in Beirut, coordinated everything with Nasrallah. We must remember and not forget Bashar that is in the middle. I heard that last night or night before that, somebody done like a courtesy visiting in one of his air bases and just destroyed all the runways. And it's only the beginning. It's only the beginning. And we are ready. And if we will have, we'll go for it. Whether we're willing, the answer, whether we're ready, yes. Whether we want to be there, not necessarily. Our main problem right now is to eliminate and to take down Hamas. And it's going to be a long one, a tough one. It's not going to be easy. And it's not like another operation that we used to have. It's years going to continue.
Thank you for your analysis and assessment there, Zohar, as bleak as it is. But you touched upon a very good point that I'd like to open up a bit more. I mean, I've been observing the IRGC's structural and doctrinal changes in the past year, and all of which pointed towards confrontation with Israel, an increased appetite and move towards escalation with Israel. Today, we really see that the IRGC's calculus is based on the view that the US does not want to hold it accountable, does not want to impose consequences on Tehran directly. And based off this calculus, it is upping the ante and providing a roadmap for escalation, trying to control escalation with threats of a multi-front attack. You see UANI doing a road trip across to Syria. You see Amir Abdullahian in Syria, Lebanon, Qatar, etc. How, in your view, can you shift the IRGC's calculus for escalation? And I want to get your thoughts on the US response so far, in both its rhetorical but also practical support for Israel, coupled with, and I should say, the European response, because I think the Europeans often get overlooked. Obviously, they're not seen as a military power. The Brits certainly are, of course. But how do you see that reaction and support coming from Washington, London, and across Europe? And what do you expect from them in terms of support?
Let's start like that. When I was the Minister of Defense in the last years, my main, of course, issue was to deal with the Pentagon and the Americans' colleagues. Now, you have to understand, Israel and the United States of America, we don't have a defense pact. We don't have a treaty. And by the way, it's beautiful. You know why? Because we share the same values. Bipartisan, whether it's an American administration, whether it's a Democratic administration or Republican one, when I see almost 100 senators that back up the president and 400 and let's say 40, sometimes 50 members of the Congress, that means that it's a really friendship. That not mean document and nothing like that. Not what we saw from the Americans. The Americans have been amazing, outstanding friends from day one. The speech that President Biden gave 2 days after this tragic event was a masterpiece of a true friend that have no doubts in the friendship and the fact that the Americans are behind us completely. We saw after a couple of days visit of the defense, the Minister of Defense, Mr. Austin, General Austin, and then we saw also, of course, twice Secretary Blinken over here in the region. We saw more than 20% of the Senate that is coming over here to visit. There is already, I don't remember the data exactly, they update me, between more than 70 or 90 flights of aid from America, military aid from America to Israel in the last 18 days. We are part of CENTCOM right now. Of course, commander of CENTCOM was here. The most advanced carrier the Americans have, the Ford, already deployed in the region. And this is exactly what you spoke, your question regarding the IRGC and what the Iranians understand from that. The Eisenhower, the second carrier in the way, it's already deployed as well. Huge amount of aircraft deployed in Jordan and in other places. Replenishment of Iron Dome batteries and other advanced munitions. Guys, America is deploying over here, and the most important, everybody know it. I saw all the meme in the media, what President Biden said twice. Don't. The don't is only for two entities. One is a country and one is a terror organization. Don't. The other issue, referring to a question, was a couple of hours ago, the last speech of President Biden, or is referring that somebody asked him regarding the terrorist attacks that the Iranians are compromising the security of the American troops in the region. And he also sent a warning. that don't do it, because otherwise there will be an implication for that. So when you look about the American presence over here, the American statement, the president, all the executive level for America, the civilian one, the security one, amazing. I have no words to express more than that. And of course, we don't take it for granted. We're grateful for that. Going back to Europe, of course, with our capabilities that, we have a very strong Air Force and IDF, that although the 7th of October was devastating, the capabilities of the IDF, whether it's the infantry or whether it's the Air Force, this event touched nothing. It's only influence the national, how we feel, the shock, the fact that we lost 1,500 civilians, 30 children that are hosting hostages in Gaza, Holocaust survivor, old women, but the IDF capabilities is still there. Regarding Europeans, and again, I'm not surprised that the first visit from Europe was by Chancellor Schulz. In Europe, we have a strategic relationship with the Germans, and the Germans are key and important to our security. And it's not by surprise that all the E3, what we call, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and of course from UK, and of course President Macron, visit us as well in the last week. Meaning the three superpowers of Europe immediately came to Israel and stand right beside us. Now we don't need American soldier to protect us. Our boys and our girls, our daughters, our boys, they are in the cockpit, they are in the tanks, they are in the infantry. We know how to protect the states of Israel. But when you have friends like that, like the Americans and like the Europeans, we are blessed.
Thank you, Zohar. I'd like to unpack that later on in the conversation. I'm sure we'll have other questions as well. But David, just to go to you, and Zohar touched on the consequences that the predicament Hassan Nasrallah finds himself in terms of the domestic constituency of Lebanon. Now, since the terrorist attacks on Israel, we have seen the Islamists across the region, or Islamist support base across the region, suddenly reappear and seek to capitalize on this on the Arab streets to nurture support and garner support for increased escalation against Israel. We've seen this sadly across Europe as well, with shocking scenes where you've heard and seen jihadi flags being erected in London and across other capitals in Europe. But specifically in relation to Lebanon, perhaps you could go into, you said that the protests that began in 2019 weren't necessarily directed at Hezbollah, they were directed at a more kind of deeper rooted corruption that exists within the Lebanese state, obviously Hezbollah being a key part of that. But I'm wondering whether, do you think Hezbollah, do you think the IRGC, I mean, the IRGC certainly believes it can, but if you're sat in Lebanon, if you're sat in southern Lebanon and you are an average person, do you think that Hezbollah has the means to capitalize on this current situation, to nurture more support for its ideology, nurture more support for confrontation with Israel, in a bit like the post-2006 33-day war, where certainly what the Iranians went headfirst straight into southern Lebanon to capitalize on the mood, to recruit, radicalize, and mobilize the domestic constituency. Obviously, a lot has changed since 2006, not least the Syrian civil war. But I wonder whether you think Hezbollah thinks it can capitalize on this situation to nurture more support, recruit, radicalize, etc.
Just one clarification: when you say capitalize, is that through opening up a second front, or simply through propaganda, or both? Both.
Where do you think the Lebanese people stand in relation to confrontation militarily, but also do you think that Hezbollah can use this as a moment to nurture more support in terms of propaganda, recruitment of youth, etc., etc.?
So kind of two parallel answers here. The Lebanese public sentiment on the issue, I think, spans the spectrum, and I don't know how to put numbers on it. There is this kind of this misperception of Lebanon as being somehow more amenable to being at peace with Israel or having more friendly sentiments towards the Israelis than other Arab countries. I think that's a mistake. I think anti-Israel sentiment is high in Lebanon, even among Christian communities, right? You have two of the most prominent Christian leaders in the country, Gibran Bassil and Sleiman Frangieh, that are explicitly on the side of the so-called resistance. Now, that's the sentiment issue, right? Can Hezbollah market this to the images, from Gaza, the death toll, as the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza is reporting them, to further the prong of its narrative that Israel is a vicious, rapacious entity that is bent on aggression, and that but for the resistance and its strength, Israel would come in and just eliminate all Lebanese gratuitously. Of course, there is that element. And there, kind of, Hezbollah has a bloodless victory in the sense that they can further the fear among Lebanese generally, particularly among its base, of Israeli intentions. And if not necessarily have people join its ranks, then at least approve of its continued armament. The idea that we need Hezbollah to protect us from bloodthirsty Israel, as they would frame it. I do think, however, that if they were to open up a second front now, they may actually lose that support. Because, again, going back to the domestic Lebanese situation, right, you're talking about a country now that hasn't had a president in almost 2 years, I think. You're talking about a country whose currency has lost almost 100% of its value, right? This is one of the worst inflation rates behind Venezuela. I think it's second behind Venezuela globally. Worst economic meltdown in 150 years. Assuming people can find food, assuming basic services are functioning, people are just kind of struggling to live in Lebanon's current situation. What they don't want, I think this kind of goes to the nature of Hezbollah's base, right? You have the hardcore, right? The people who are ideologically and religiously committed to Hezbollah's actions, to Hezbollah as an ideology. And those people, no matter what Hezbollah does, will continue to support it. The upshot, if there is one, is that these people constitute probably a minority of Hezbollah's supporters. As you keep going out, kind of the broader support comes from people who are probably not ideologically committed, probably not that informed about Hezbollah's ideology. They probably don't have a full understanding of Hezbollah's end goal of, as they put it, kind of peacefully establishing a satellite of Iran, an Iranian-style theocracy in Lebanon. They support Hezbollah for various reasons, be it the social services that the group provides, or again, this idea of resistance, right? This idea that but for Hezbollah, we would all be in danger from this entity, Israel. Those people don't necessarily want war now. They may sympathize with the Palestinians. They may look in horror at the images, but they don't feel necessarily that they need to go to war with Israel for what's happening in Palestine or in the Gaza Strip. From their perspective, again, Hezbollah's utility is defensive as they understand it. Now, that's an inaccurate understanding, but that's how they see it. If Hezbollah were to drag the country into war with all of its current circumstances, those people would probably begin to question, and as Zohar mentioned, right, the destruction that is going to be visited upon Lebanon. This is not 2006. If Hezbollah unleashes its full capabilities, I think the IDF will then, even if it takes deprioritizing Gaza to prioritize an attack on Lebanon, considering the greater threat comes from Lebanon, I think there will be a lot of damage coming to Lebanon. The day after, if Hezbollah initiates this conflict, I cannot see Lebanon's erstwhile funders, right? It's partners in the West or the Gulf states stepping in to fund reconstruction after a Hezbollah-created mess. Considering that the international community has been kind of bent on accountability for Lebanon, prior to providing any funding, I don't see that being forthcoming. Iran doesn't have the pockets deep enough right now, or the funds, to fund not just, again, the damage that would be done to Hezbollah strongholds in South Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley and Dahiya and Beirut, but also more broadly to Lebanese infrastructure and Lebanon generally, that will be done as a result of this war, considering the intertwining of Hezbollah with Lebanese infrastructure. So the day after, you're ending up in a situation where people still don't have food, still don't have electricity, still don't have properly functioning government, and now on top of that, they have to deal with the consequences of the destructive war. Hezbollah's utility starts to begin to be questioned. Now, again, this is where the calculus comes in, not for Nasrallah, but for Iran. I think when we saw Foreign Minister Amir Abdullahian in Beirut, I think it was 13 days ago, and he sat down with Nasrallah on October 13th, and they had a discussion. I can imagine the conversation going on about, like, well, what can you do right now? What can you, Hezbollah, offer, right? There is a hierarchy in the way the resistance axis operates. Iran does give orders, but they do take into consideration their proxies' domestic circumstances. They don't want to lose them. This is the genius, if you will, of the Iranian model. And I think Nasrallah probably framed the situation very similarly to what I did. And he's like, look, this is what I can do. What they are doing now, this harassment on the Israeli border that has taken Israeli lives, I think from an international law standpoint, this does rise to a level of armed attack that could justify an Israeli military incursion. But as Zohar mentioned, the Israelis are prioritizing Gaza for better or for worse. And so this allows Hezbollah room to kind of conduct these pinprick attacks, right? Bleed the Israelis, look like they're doing something for Palestine, and meanwhile not suffer the full consequences that they otherwise would have had this happened, on October 5th or October 6th. So I think that's where Hezbollah is now. Again, the question becomes for Ismail Ghani, for Hossein Salami, for I don't know how high up the calculus on this goes for Khamenei himself. Is it worth risking Hezbollah in a confrontation with Israel right now, right? It's star proxy, it's ideologically most loyal proxy, the spearhead of all of its regional activities, right? Iran goes into somewhere, be it Iraq, the Palestinian territories, Yemen, Hezbollah goes first, it opens the path. This is the utility of Hezbollah. Is it worth risking that for Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, these subpar entities whose ideological loyalty is not as solid and whose utility is not to Iran's broader activities is not as high as Hezbollah's, but at the same time, they've had an investment since at least 2005, since the Israeli withdrawal, in building up Gaza into what we see today, the Palestinian militias. This is a southern front, right? This is Iran's southern front. Do they lose that? And that's the calculus.
Yeah, and I think that is it ultimately comes down to that. And I mean, what's really interesting is that you mentioned about domestic support for Hezbollah and kind of anti-Israel sentiment in Lebanon. In Iran itself, the population have, at least what we see, have been overwhelmingly supportive of Israel, and obviously we know that domestically, the Achilles heel of the regime in Iran is the Iranian population, who have obviously been on the streets consistently, for the past 5 years, explicitly calling for anti-regime demands, calling for the overthrow of the Islamic Republic, and that itself could have major implications in completely changing the landscape of the region and support for these terrorist organizations. I want to go over to Zohar to touch upon, for me, an issue that really, I think, must be at the center and is at the center of Israel's strategy, and I think it should be at the center of global attention, and I believe it's not getting as much attention as it should be. The issue of the more than 200 hostages being held by Hamas, including children, in Gaza. You have a situation, Zohar, where you have the we can state October 7th terrorist attacks were akin to Israel's 9/11. And you have the at least operational masterminds. I mean, I'm not talking about the Islamic Republic, but the terrorist, at least operation HQ leaders, sat in Qatar. You have Ismail Haniyeh, the akin to the Bin Laden of his time, sat in Qatar whilst you have hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza. What do you think? I mean, it's inconceivable to have a situation, if this was in the post 9/11 period, where you had a non-NATO major US ally hosting bin Laden, and the US saying, you got to hand him over or else there'll be consequences. Where do you see Qatar's role here in relation to the hostage situation? How can the US put pressure on Qatar? It seems to me that the US and the Europeans have huge leverage over the Qataris, given the fact that they have immense business ties and have immense business interests in the West. How do you see Qatar's role here? How can the US pressure the Qataris to hand the bin Ladens of today over to America and the Israelis, and also facilitate the freedom of the hostages who are being held captive by Hamas?
With your permission, before we're getting into Qatar, I want to refer to Lebanon for a minute. The question that you asked a couple of minutes ago, and then I will go to Qatar. You will be surprised, but the Israelis have nothing against the Lebanese. Although we used to stay 18 years in Lebanon, we don't have any bad emotions or something like that. On the contrary. And based on my experience, we used to have quite interesting relationship with all the parties in Lebanon, whether they're the Sunnis, whether they're the Druze, whether they're the Shia, or whether they're the Christians. Now forget about statesmen and things like that. Imagine to yourself Lebanon without Hezbollah, without a guy that is sitting in a bunker from 2006 and controlling behind the scene this country. Guys, I'm telling you, Lebanon is less than only a couple of hours a day they have electricity. Israel, with the gas that we found, it will take a minute to the Israeli government, whoever the government, to supply electricity completely to Lebanon. Our border, our ports, everything. We left Lebanon in 24 May 2000. Lebanon is stacked in there. We don't have no IDF there. We have no presence. We took the GPS based on the international community demand, mainly the UN, and we just built a fence over there, and that's it. Since then, Hezbollah is holding the Lebanese as hostages. You know how many times behind the scene, in the media, we offered them from medical support after crisis, after the Beirut explosions, in the Arab Spring. I mean, they have so many refugees from Syria in the last years. It's devastating. Take, for example, President Macron. He tries so badly to help Lebanon. But in Arabic, as we say, the Lebanese, Lubnan huwa Lubnan. The Lebanese have their own DNA. They don't ask nothing in order to improve their situation. And they are kidnapping completely by Hezbollah, that he is not like running the country, but he is running the country. He is controlling the prime minister. And by the way, there is no political structure over there. They are without presidents for years. They are without prime minister for years. And there is, as a good prime minister, like used to be Hariri, they're taking a big car bomb and just explode in the middle of Beirut and kill him. And we know that Hezbollah is behind him. Hezbollah don't like to see Lebanon flourishing. And this is the tragic of Lebanon, with the help of the Iranian, of course, and with the help of Bashar al-Assad, that completely this, what we call the triangle between Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah, is holding from the Lebanese to flourish. This is my sense regarding this issue. Regarding Qatar, guys, we're in a very sensitive situation right now. Behind the scene, there is not a lot of negotiation. Everybody understands exactly what you said right now about the leverage that the Americans are having with investments on Qatar, the European as well. we understand that the Qataris, what they're doing exactly, above everything, to try to free most of our, all of our hostages that are holding in Gaza. And I hope that all the efforts behind the scene with all our good friends, mainly the Americans right now, and if the American will need some support from the European, they will get it like in a minute. And it seems to me that the Qataris right now don't need so much motivations, because you can see how the Americans, many of them, are right now to declare that the Qataris are sponsoring terror organization like Hamas. It's bad to the Qataris. They don't like to see it. And it seems to me that the Qataris have an interest right now to be the good guys over here. So for me to give a statement right now, negative one or something like that, I don't think that this is the time. On the contrary, as our NSC said yesterday, for all the efforts that the Qatar is doing right now, we are grateful. And the fact that they succeed to release, like a couple of days ago, 2 of the hostages, and as we say over here in the neighborhood, inshallah, they will give, they will have a success in the near future with dozens of them. That will be positive. To do the math and the calculation, what they have done wrong, what we have done wrong, regarding Hamas, regarding the approach, regarding the money, regarding the support, we'll have time to deal with this issue later on. Right now, the priority is to have a success and to release most of our civilians.
Thank you both. I'm going to open it to the audience if we have any questions. If not, I have many to ask myself, given that we have 2 truly distinguished experts. Whilst those questions come in, I want to go to David very quickly. And David, you've done some fantastic research on the role of US aid in all of this, and whether US aid should be contingent on real meaningful change in Lebanon in relation to Hezbollah. Clearly, I think the October 7th terrorist attacks on Israel demonstrated that you can't, deal with these issues in isolation. They are interconnected. You cannot give aid, foreign aid, for example, to Gaza and ignore the political reality with Hamas presence there. So perhaps you can unpack this a bit more for us, David. It's clearly that things cannot return to the way they are, the way they were. So much has changed. There needs to be a complete recalibration of policy. Zohar alluded to this in relation to Israel, but this has much bigger implications than just policy on Israel. It has implications for the region. It has implications globally. Specifically in relation to foreign aid, perhaps you could open this up for us, and how must the US, treat these issues holistically rather than deal with them in isolation?
So I think on this question, Zohar is a little bit more forgiving when it comes to Lebanon than I am. I would not describe Hezbollah as the source of Lebanon's problems. It is a symptom of Lebanon's makeup. The Lebanese, the way they have divided their country up, the way they have operated, right? If we look at Lebanon's political system, it is essentially feudalistic. It's not even sectarian, right? The Maronites are not united around one figure. They never have been. The Druze, same. The Shia are not, right? What you have is kind of a system that is politically apportioned by sect, but then kind of there are subsectarian leaders, feudal lords, that seize upon kind of a support from within that sect, a specific amount of support, and they take that support and then leverage that as political influence or governmental influence. If you look at the last elections, for example, Hezbollah won 350,000 votes in parliament. Now that didn't give it the largest number of seats, because the way the Lebanese parliamentary seats are apportioned. the largest number of seats, if I'm not mistaken, went to the Lebanese forces. But if you look at absolute numbers of votes, Lebanese forces got 200,000 votes. So that's almost 150,000 less than Hezbollah. And that's just voters. That's just the people who went out to the electorate to cast their ballot. So this is not a marginal phenomenon in Lebanon, right? And it is Hezbollah is able to demand. Right, Hezbollah officials, not just them, even their political partners, opponents will say that Hezbollah is a critical, integral component of Lebanon's social and political fabric. This is absolutely true, whether we like it or not, because it does have grassroots support. You can't tell Lebanese forces or FPM or future movement, when there was a future movement, if you get X amount of Sunni support, you get X position, right? Or if you get X amount of Shia support to Amal, you get X position. But then you come to Hezbollah and say, oh, if you get X amount of Shia support, we're going to keep you on the side, right? So we need to understand the makeup of Lebanon and Hezbollah's position in that makeup as a starting point to understand what US policy prescriptions or positions should be. So understanding that yes, Hezbollah equals Lebanon equals Hezbollah is an oversimplification of the case, but that Hezbollah is an integral part of Lebanon's social and political fabric. It is a symptom of the way Lebanon was made up, and that the Lebanese, as a result, be it the government, in normal days, right? Forget now when you have an economic crisis that you have to at least look like you're trying to deal with. Imagine a situation where now the lira is worthless and any Lebanese government tries to act against Hezbollah. It's not going to happen, right? Even if with the best of intentions. But until that happens, I mean, from the US perspective, right, that's a Lebanese problem. We are providing funding. We are propping up this country to the extent that we are providing funding. And the more we alleviate, as we've seen, right, Lebanon's collapse has constrained Hezbollah's ability to act. Right, the inverse, if we prop up Lebanon, the more we prop up Lebanon, the more breathing room Hezbollah has, is not in the U.S. interest, it's not in the Israeli interest. So my approach, my prescription has been that we should, demand accountability from the Lebanese to the extent that they we should first assess their value as a partner at all. But if we assess that they have some value as a partner, to the extent that they are able to operate or they are able to deliver on any metric, that is the extent to which we should provide aid. And that goes to the LAF. I mean, within the past weeks, we've seen that the LAF has deployed to the border, and even that deployment has done nothing to stop Hezbollah's aggression against the state of Israel. And that, if we're being realistic, the US primary interest in Lebanon, not the sole interest, is to ensure that the spearhead of our primary regional adversary, Iran, does not have the ability to act freely. We ask the Lebanese to do that. We give them funds on the assumption that they will be able to curtail Hezbollah. Yet in the past, since 2005, right, since we've stepped in to try to aid the Lebanese and train the LAF, Hezbollah has only gotten exponentially stronger. So the utility of this policy is shown to be worthless. I would also like to add on the issue of the Qataris. I think there should be a day of reckoning there too, because the Qataris, yes, are now acting as the firefighter, but let's not forget that they're also simultaneously, and prior to this, been acting as the arsonist. In terms of, we talked about soft power, Al Jazeera is the most listened to outlet in the Sunni Arab world. And this outlet right now is acting as a Hamas propaganda mouthpiece. It is indistinguishable, to my sense, watching Al Mayadeen, watching Quds TV, which is owned by Hamas. There is no distinction in the narrative. And it's not only anti-Israel sentiment that they drum up, which is bad enough from a US perspective, right? This is our critical ally in the region. But from an American perspective, right, the drumming up of anti-American sentiment through this outlet from a country that we as the United States consider an ally should be something that we consider unacceptable. So I think there should be a reassessment of not just US posture vis-a-vis its chief regional adversary, the Islamic Republic of Iran, but also towards entities or countries that we consider partners when they are not acting like partners.
Very, very well put, David. I mean, when you see the images come through of Amir Abdullahian, an IRGC Quds Force affiliate, foreign minister of the Islamic Republic, landing in Doha, kissing and hugging, smiling Ismail Haniyeh, whilst these terrorist operations and attacks are going on against Israel, being hosted at a luxury hotel in in Doha, I mean, it does speak volumes, and I think there will certainly have to at some point be a recalibration of policy, reassessing who our friends in the region really are. I've got a question come through, and I think I'm going to direct this one at Zohar, if I may. The question is: it seems as though one of the hardest challenges of a ground invasion will be the tunnels. How can Israel handle this?
I'm not sure that this is the platform that I should explain how we'll deal with that, but I will agree with the question. No doubt it's a challenging one and a tough one. And no doubt that the fact that you just mentioned before, that they have more than 200 hostages over there, it will be tough, but then again, we don't have other choice. In a way, they took us by surprise in October 7th. No one believed. I'm telling you, no one. The conception was, forget about right now the intelligence failure and other things, that human being is capable to do what they've done to pregnant women and things like that. After years that we gave them to work in Israel, water supply, electricity, everything, without that, with the economical relationship that we have with Gaza, the fact that they hate us, the fact that they're our enemy, but in the end, that took us, nobody imagined that something barbaric like that will happen. We will have to think over regarding our national strategy, regarding our policy, regarding Gaza, regarding the Hamas, regarding Hezbollah. And right now, in the last 2 weeks, when Hezbollah is shoulder to shoulder with Hamas, you ask me, the picture that are coming from Beirut from yesterday, with Sahal al-Aruri and Hassan Nasrallahs, this picture is saying everything. It's not to defend, they are not the defender of Lebanon anymore, like they used to claim all these years. They are barbarians, that they are the only one that right now back up Hamas with the fact that they are holding kids. By the way, Nasrallah have never done something like that. The fact that right now he's approving to show those pictures, that means that he's the same guy and the same ideas like we saw from the Hamas. And you ask me, this is something fundamental that we understood. And if he will cross the line, and he already crossed it in the so many attacks that he've done all over the Israeli border in the last 2 weeks, guys, we're coming to a crossroad over here that we are really right now, first of all, ready. Secondly, determined to protect our cities and our families. And right now, really, we are deploying in a way that we've never been deployed like that in the last 20 years.
Very quickly, off the back of what both of you have said, and I raised this as well in my opening remarks, that on the one hand, obviously we have the immediate and priority that Israel faces in neutralizing the Hamas threat, but more broadly beyond the region, there is an information war. There is a disinformation war. There is you are seeing disinformation being circulated both online, misreporting in the media, and the implication that has is not just on perception, although the perception is obviously very, very important when we see flags, jihadi flags in London, in other capitals in Europe, in America, elsewhere, but it's had direct consequences for the Jewish community across Europe, across America. In your view, very quickly, Zohar, because we don't have much time left, how can these Western governments and how can Israel support these Western governments in countering this disinformation? Because it seems to me that the information war, the psychological warfare, that the classic, as I said, IRGC textbook strategy, it seems to me that if you were in the Beit Rahbari, in the Supreme Leader's office, they would be quite pleased with the way the information war is going from their side. In your view, because this directly has consequences for Jewish community across Europe, across America, we've seen surging levels of anti-Semitism. How best can Israel and the West come together to counter this disinformation battle?
Sorry, but I'm not going to be, let's say, I would give an answer, a tough one. We are not there right now.
Sure.
We need eyes on the ball. Eyes on the ball right now mean Gaza. Eyes on the ball mean right now Hamas. Not that I'm saying that what you ask me is not important. It's crucial. We saw it in Ukraine. We saw it in the Pacific. We see it right now in Lebanon, in Gaza, all over. No doubt that the free world is dealing with this phenomena of fake news and all the warfare that is going behind the scene, and it's crucial to deal with it. We, as the Israeli right now, before we're teaching everybody, we have to be concentrated for our main effort. And the main effort right now is to take them down and to stop it. After it, we'll have to sit with you guys. One of the failure of our conceptions was regarding the radical Islam. And affiliates of the Muslim Brotherhood, like Hamas, are all over the free world. And there is a thin line over here between democracy, freedom of speech, like Israel is all about, to respect the other, even if there is a dispute, whether it's geographical or other, and to enter civilians' house on Saturday morning and to slaughter them, children and women pregnant in bed. And Europe have to learn the lesson from us as well, because we have been blindfolded, because we thought that human being is not able to do something like. It's in a way, when the American launch, September 11, because they understood that there is really something that challenges the democracy over here, we're in the same spot right now.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, Zohar. And it's obviously not just Hamas Islamist support base you have across Europe, and Europe. You have the IRGC that has spent significant resource trying to nurture homegrown radicalization, homegrown extremism. Here in London, there was an IRGC cell exposed, and the US has now called on the British to prescribe the IRGC as a terrorist organization, and we hope that Rishi Sunak leads the way and leads Europe in doing so. We don't have that much time left. David, just very quickly to you on the same question, because you touched upon the propaganda aspect of this. Very quickly, in 2 minutes, what would you be your response? Because this does affect communities across the West who have seen a surge in anti-Semitic attacks and anti-Semitism, as well as other forms of extremism. So how do we best combat this? Because it clears to me that it is a priority, should be a priority for us.
Look, I think I don't think Israel has the luxury to not fight both wars at the same time, right? Because I think the success of the military operation depends on being able to decimate Hamas, being not only able to decimate Hamas, but this collection of forces that we've talked about in Gaza. Otherwise, if they are allowed to survive, Iran will step back in, will rebuild, and we will have the same horror show that we saw on October 7th again and again. And in order to do that, Israel has to kind of prolong the conflict as much as possible. In order to prolong the conflict as much as possible, it needs to maintain the credit in the hearts and minds of people across the West, who will then lobby their governments one way or another. Iran is betting on this, right? Iran is betting on the images, and like you said, they've perfected the integration of propaganda into warfare. It is very hard to debate the emotional impact of a dead baby in Gaza, right? And I think the Israelis have kind of held back for understandable reasons out of a sense of respect for their own dead. I think they're trying to work within as much as possible that they can to kind of show what happened and what the justification is, the justness of this war. And I think this is probably Israel's most just war in history. But it is very difficult. You still see a lot of media outlets, respectable otherwise media outlets, insisting on maintaining kind of the Hamas narrative out of fear of offending Palestinian communities across the West, or pro-Palestinian
prime example
circles.
of this, by the way, was the bogus strike on the hospital.
Yeah.
I mean, even you had top media outlets reporting on this, misreporting, not checking their facts, and the damage had been done already, even though you had governments across Europe, Canada, and the US state. Actually, this was an Islamic Jihad missile, not an Israeli strike, but the damage was done. As far as the IRGC and its proxies are concerned, it's a propaganda victory. I'd like to wrap it up there. Thank you, because we're out of time. We could talk for hours. I certainly could with both of you. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting you both. Thank you to David. Thank you to Zohar for joining us in this extremely difficult time. And thank you all for tuning in. I'm sure there will be many more of these UANI expert webinars, and I look forward to seeing you at them later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.